shed those layers, shed those skins, and be okay with new growth and transition. And it's just like waves at the beach, like what comes in and what goes out. So I viewed my music as that. I've been playing music since back in the days in church. I used to sing, worship songs and stuff. And so I don't really sing worship songs anymore, but that was kind of like my first love with music.
I don't know. I feel like I kind of disagree a little bit of that. A lot of your songs feel like they're worshiping the higher power as well. It's just in a different form.
Yes, they're just not like white 70s hippie songs. Where a bunch of white people get together and sing it. And not that I'm not trying to be racist. I'm just saying that, with some religions, there only tends to be one color involved.
Yeah, and I honestly feel like I do think there's plenty to gain from the Abrahamic traditions, but I do feel that there's this inherent quality about it that really focuses on ownership, and I think that right there becomes a standpoint, especially us as indigenous people, that really becomes a point of dissension because that's the opposite of how we always lived, and in a lot of ways, unfortunately, through colonization, we've fallen into that model a lot as well, and that seems to be a big part of a lot of your music nowadays is that healing and focusing inward on the actual land that you grew up on, and trying to bring healing to that because it's super necessary right now. No matter what state your reservation is in right now, there's so much healing that needs to be going down. And I mean, let's be honest, we basically live on concentration camps,
Yes.
but it's an opportunity. Yeah. So I mean, this will probably sound a little messed up the way I'm going to put it, but how was it growing up on your concentration camp?
Well, I guess I didn't realize it because I was going to a white Christian church, and I was told I wasn't Indian.
Whoa.
And I was very aware of my surroundings and my relatives, but I was encouraged to not acknowledge it and to sing these other songs and to pray to a white Jesus, which I don't know if Jesus was that white. I think
Nah, bro, hair of wool. Hair of wool.
So what was it like? Well, I guess I didn't start coming to my own realization of what it was until my older years when I wasn't afraid to look at myself and look at my surroundings for what they were. And I guess growing up, I was thrown into. I was down to be a part of my culture, and so I had these big divides or extreme opposites. Raised like predominantly white Christian, hung out with white people. It was like told you're white, and I have a lot of white. There's nothing wrong with that. I embrace my European roots too, but to like abandon the land we're on, it led to a lot of disease, a lot of destructive behaviors, a lot of not knowing who I am, willing to sacrifice myself in the wrong ways, and to put myself in positions that it didn't necessarily benefit me or anyone around me, and it just led to a very self-destructive lifestyle of alcohol and drugs and violence. And but I mean, that's on the res. You survive, you get by, and it's a sport almost. And so I was down. I was down for the cause. I was down with my relatives, and then I recognized, okay, like that's a little too far that way. And so I took a journey. I did a walkabout. I left. Started a family. I came back. And then I started really seeing the truth that, reservations were designed to hold natives, and that if you were a serf, SCRF, you were released back into public, but then you could easily be put back into slavery and to work on these missions, and that my relatives would burn down the missions every couple of years. And like, why was that shit going on? Why weren't they teaching me this in school? How come we're praising Kit Carson and Columbus, and we're not even looking at the doctrine of discovery of this nation? And so I really just, man, I went deep, and then I went a little too deep. so so it's balance. It's like balance, right? So now I'm at a point where I'm like, all right, I'm making peace with all my relations, and that includes everyone that's around me. And one way I've been able to do that, I feel like music's been my saving grace. It's been my help, God, my spirit, my heart, my fire. Um, and it comes out, and all the flames are always different. They always come out different, and I'm so grateful that that's what I've had in me. That those were my gifts from my land. It taught me how to sing. It taught me how to pray. I always had a great intuitive nature that I trusted and I followed, and it led me here to this place of balance.
That's awesome. And I totally relate to the story of being on a reservation and the difficulties of dealing with that, because I'm actually reading this book right now called King, Magician, Warrior, Lover. I fucked up but that's the name of it. And it basically it's rediscovering the archetypes of the mature masculine. And that's something, while reading this I was like, holy crap, that's exactly what we do on Res. Is we recognize that there's this need to have ritualistic connection to each other, but we don't have those rituals anymore because, like you're saying, and whether it's the mission system, whether it's boarding schools, all that got stripped away from us and literally beaten out of us.
Yeah.
And we're still looking for a lot of those ritual practices and there's those ceremonies, but there's not spaces for them because all the elders that had those knowledge, they passed, and it sucks. But I do think that it, even though it's being expressed in a rather toxic way, the compulsion for a lot of us to seek a group, whether it's like most of the time on Res, it's in a gang like scenario, so we end up trying to seek rituals, but we're still rooted in boyhood while doing that. So
Wow.
we go and we do destructive things to ourselves and to those who surround us, because that manhood hasn't fully been initiated, because they're just pseudo initiations basically.
Ooh, that's it. That's it.
Straight up. Yeah, this is in the first chapter of this book too. I haven't read this that much. I was like, dang, like,
Dang, that's like the first page. That's the forward.
yeah, for reals. I was like, holy crap, this is gonna be a good one. But yeah, I feel like for a long time I was on a similar path, but the way that I went about it was trying to exclude myself a lot from my cousins, from a lot of my family, and I went to a fucking white school as well. I went to a fancy schmancy prep school, and I learned a lot, but I also learned how dysfunctional that structure is and how important it is to renew and revive a lot of the structures that we had and find adaptation in these times as well, because we also have to recognize that we live under these colonial structures and we have all this healing that we need to go through before we even really go about the true journey. So it's just, there's a lot to be hopeful for with this model in mind. So I think it's dope to try and connect with folk like you, because you put yourself out there, man. You try and be a representative of your people in a true way, in a truly mature masculine way as well, which is something that we don't have going on a whole lot in our circles. And yeah, it's just awesome to be able to share a story with you, man, because your songs as well, they've helped me as well. Like Man on Fire, that song right there.
That
Holy
was about quitting alcohol. That was about going through withdrawals. And when you go through withdrawals, it feels like your whole body's on fire. And then, you start seeing shit, hallucinating, you know, no fun.
yeah. I mean, but in those hallucinations, was there any visions? Was there any guidance that was happening in those moments of going through something totally terrible?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think at our lowest points, we're reminded of what we want the most. And the greatest medicine is the pain. That's how we learn and we see what we really want. Unfortunately, there's times and people that don't want to feel that or go through it. But I think going through it is what's necessary. And the visions for me showed me that I had been longing to have a family connection. I had been longing to feel at peace in a family. And like you were saying, that having that tribal, having that gathering, having that camaraderie, that space being held, I was missing that in my life, and alcohol was the cheapest, most convenient option for that feeling, that sub feeling. And so, sitting in the pain, one, you learn how strong you are, that you're resilient as a human being. You can endure pretty much anything, and and then through those, if you're willing to look at it, if you're willing to make peace with the demons, which are really just our ancestors too, talking to us, because outside of duality, it's all good. And so when we make peace with those demons, we also are able to find strength in our emotional uh, awareness and our psyche, that all right, like we can do something. We can do something about this. We can talk about it. We can be open about it. I think making that song was just that, like coming to terms and being public with myself openly about what I was struggling with. And through that, I found a lot of healing. So I would say the visions were very on point. Of like all signs lead to home, and we're on the right path.
Awesome. And visionary states, that's something that I feel really can only be induced when there's that necessity inside. And I think that a lot of times that necessity inside needs to be, something needs to happen for that to be engaged. And lately I've been trying to develop my own personal ritualistic practices, whether it's meditation, yoga, just grounding things to induce that that state of being open to those visions. and and it's, it's not necessarily the same way as going about maybe using some psychedelic substances, which I also think is beneficial, but in a lot of ways I've already done those things in certain ways, and there's a certain amount of integration that I feel needs to be done so that it doesn't just become something to play with.
There you go.
And yeah, and the practices that might take a little bit more time, like meditation or yoga or prayer, things like that, I think that the dedication it takes to build up that practice to be able to do it with some sort of skill is really necessary for all of us. Like, we all need to build those sanctuaries of self, and I think we need to look as inward as possible to do that. And a lot of times when we look inward, we see the earth.
Wow.
So
When we look forward, we see the earth.
Yeah. And I mean that seems like that's been a big part of your path as well, is the earth and making a connection with it in a consistent and serious way. So, what have been some of the ways and some of the methods of finding grounding with the Mother Earth that have really helped you out throughout your journey?
Yeah, I would say that some of the ways that have helped me ground is just what you mentioned. I think psychedelics sometimes take me a little too far and just distract me. Um, and the greatest connections I've had is when I'm able to quiet myself, which seems to be even hard. Like the hardest trip is to to be still and to go within. And right, man, that's heavy. Like that's heavy. I think what you just said took me a little minute, but that's been my experience. Is like because when I'm able to find that space, that's what you see. You see where you're at. You see where you're made from. You see that you're an infinite soul having a human experience. But everything that we see with our eyes is the earth, is our creation, is a hallucination of atoms. And so I think uh, allowing ourselves to gather in that perspective in that space, using our conscious awareness. I heard Eckhart Tolle say that if you weren't here and you weren't seeing something, there would just be atoms and particles floating in space. And so it's our awareness that brings life and keeps everything afloat here. And so, what does that say about turning that awareness inward? And, so surfing, when I'm singing on stage or in front of people, I'm like gone. I'm in a whole other world. And it's taken me a long time to be able to accomplish that, but it's a deep state of meditation I can get into. Um, and so prayer, food can help. Um, yeah, I think at some point, every part of your day could be that. I'm not saying that's my day, but I've seen how it could get there, and that we at any moment we could grab onto something and ground. Like just look at a plant, look at a human, look at children, look at the sky.
Yeah, no, there's nothing but opportunities to find grounding, and oftentimes it's our own minds that are getting in the way of that. And I do think that it's those times when we're able to tap into the collective unconscious that we really are able to benefit the most from each other. So that's been one of the things that I have found beneficial about psychedelics, is that it does push past those boundaries in a way, and helps you to gain those understandings. And I do think that they're definitely useful tools that I've utilized in my life, and very likely will continue to in certain experiences that I need to. But I've
Absolutely.
lately I've really been finding that there needs to be more grounding on the other side. And when those, like you're saying, when those supposed hallucinations come in, which I think is honestly just reverberating at a different frequency, I have had experiences where there's been very potent exchanges with ancestry, with spirit, and it's been something that I'm definitely going to cherish forever, for sure. But I also see the need to like sweat lodge. That's something that has been super crucial for me, and honestly, being in the middle of a sweat without any substances whatsoever, I've had potent experiences extremely similar to psychedelic experiences. And that's something that I've been wanting to bring to my reservation, Morongo, as well. But it's also one of those things where that spiritual space is something that I recognize I'm not that familiar with, and that it's just as chaotic as this realm in a lot of ways. So there's a lot of groundwork and a lot of a lot of convening with the spirit that I feel needs to be done before necessarily opening those spaces. And that's why a lot of different cultures, they have such strict protocol surrounding ceremonies, because it is really important.
It's very important. It's very important to respect the protocol. Otherwise, you can just fly off in space. And or hurt each other or hurt ourselves. And so, I think protocol's been passed down and for a good reason. And that's to give us the greatest benefit. I was able to do sweat the other night at Tierra Madre Gardens and with good family. And and it's so potent and impactful when we're able to be present. Be present. For me, I don't know, maybe I'm like perma-fried because when I was in high school, man, I took acid all the time and mushrooms, and I didn't use it right. And so now the greatest trip for me and also for my people is just being present. It's like, I was talking to an elder just to talk on psychedelics for a moment, and I was asking him, like, as our people, like, what was our medicine, like, that we used to go way out? Like, we don't use any of those because we'll just put you on a mountain for 4 days, and that's the medicine. Like, being with yourself and being there. And we're going into that womb. When we go to the lodge, we're going into that womb. Like, we're surrendered. We're surrendered. And all these substances that we take, they're not giving us anything other than a key. So I don't know that much about neurology or neuroscience, but what I do know is that these chemicals are just opening a door and they're releasing what we already have inside of us. That's something to trip on.
Yeah, exactly. They're on a lot of those things. I think that's why it becomes dangerous to have this model of like, oh, I'm just tripping out, having fun, man. Because no, those are extensions of ourselves. Those are mirrors that we're looking into oftentimes, and yeah, it's really important to recognize how powerful those are, and to treat them as such. I know specifically with my peoples, we utilize the Serrano, which we're actually called the so I'm from the Coyote clan, and our indigenous name is the Wahiyam. And that's something that I respect about Kumeyaay, man. You guys went and completely switched the script, and you don't call yourself Degenyo anymore. And that's something I respect. Like I'm always telling my people, like, yo, we gotta drop the Spanish name. Like that's our slave name.
Yeah, and even Kumeyaay is kind of it's periodical, right? It's about different periods of time. I think Ipai is more
Appropriate.
before those other adaptations.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
yeah, I think it's important, right? It's just to honor those roots.
Yeah, and that's been a big thing about my journey. I've literally seen how just committing myself to learning a bit of the language. Like I honestly haven't done nearly as much as I should, but even making that commitment at all has opened up the door of possibility, and a whole lot of coincidences started to happen as soon as I did that. And it really did feel like the ancestors just saying like, all right, now you finally wanted to talk to us. Awesome.
Well, now we can understand you.
Exactly. So, oh,
I
okay.
started speaking my language a little bit, and I learned a prayer and songs, and I had a rattle that was given to me, and I had these gifts come into my life, and I almost felt it was an honor to have these doors to be opened, and it's our choice to walk into them. And I think once we're in there, we have a great honor of doing some real work that could help our generations.
Nah, man, we got that indigenous privilege, bruh. For reals though, like honestly, when speaking to people who are trying to go on a similar path, I feel like a lot of what happens is we have many people who are immigrants and they don't have that grounding to the actual land that opens up a lot of what we're talking about in a much more natural way. Even though for you and me, like we didn't grow up knowing our language, but I'm sure stepping into it felt in some way, shape, or form natural to you, and you it felt like you're fitting into the right peg, like for the first time in your life, and
Yes.
and that's something that I do think that we should treat as a privilege and an honor to be able to have that connection. Because even with a lot of the youth these days, I see them jumping into ceremony and doing it in a way that is so fearless, and it's freaking awesome because I recognize how beneficial that's gonna be for us as we're going on. Like literally right now, little goose pimples even thinking about that stuff because the youth they really are what we need right now, and those are gonna be the ones that become the men, the women in our communities that hold space, that hold ceremony, and that have been brought up with it in a way, as opposed to folk like you and I who had to do a little bit more digging to find those things.
Yeah.
It's
We really had to choose it. We had to choose
yeah,
it.
and it wasn't an easy choice either because the other choices that were going around there, those were the only real examples that we had. So, like you said, you had to move away. Like I had to move away from my reservation as well to feel like I was of service for my community again, and just grow up a lot because I didn't necessarily. And this is hindsight being 2020. I think that I recognized that I wanted to be a better example because the kids they do what they see, and what I was doing wasn't necessarily something that I wanted the youth to see. So
Yeah, we we learn from what's modeled. You know, we can be told things all day. We can go to different schools, but it's those that model it that lead us. So I've always taken that understanding and I find high value in being a model. And I've heard my aunties say, you know what, we wear these masks, and it's not a bad thing.
it's not.
And sometimes we have to wear them. We have to show up and put that mask on because there's someone in us that really needs to see that, needs to know that.
Yeah, and I think it's okay to recognize that we have different sides of ourselves, and there's good aspects of those selves and bad aspects of those selves that can come out, and I don't think that there's anything fake about having agency over that and recognizing what situation you put that mask on. I think it's actually important to recognize that they're masks in the first place.
Yes. Yeah. Hell yeah.
Yeah, and this is you know we're talking about substances and whatnot. I got my big old joint right here. What what's some of your favorite herb, man? Like, have you ever grown any? Like, what's the I know that you guys have also had a rather successful endeavor with cannabis. I've actually went and got some of your guys' stuff, and it's good.
I'm at a, yes, my favorite strain is probably the OG. Um, let's see. I'm not super picky, right?
Oh, me neither.
If it's grown love, and then that's where that's that's my baby. But I grew some at one point. That was Bruce Lee OG,
Ooh.
and that was the best. And And what I realized was, I'm getting a little bit of an echo back. I hope that's not affecting anything.
I'll just turn it down on my part a little bit.
The cannabis plant, one, chooses its gender, and then it learns its patient. And so you can have this relationship with the plant. And I think it started my greater connection to all other plants. I did the cannabis plants since I was young, just like just yelled out of the garden, like come touch me, smell me, so beautiful. And since then, it's been this incredible journey just into myself and to the world around me. So I was growing the plant, and it ended up growing way more than I needed. And I wondered why. And I was like, I don't need this much, right? So who's it for? And all right, well, whoever comes or whatever comes, I'll give it to them. Well, it was like a year, like 2 years, I was giving this stuff away to people. And that was after the fact that I needed help with the harvest. And I called a friend over, and he had mentioned that his wife was going through some serious medical issues, like serious, like devastating medical issues, and it was heartbroken. And I said, well, if I give you half my crop, will this help anything? And it turned out it did. It helped them greatly. It put food on the table. They were able to pay their bills, and they were able to process it as medicine. And it was just such a big relief for them. And I thought, oh, that's why I grew that much. And so then it grew into this great relationship. So I love cannabis. I'm actually not using cannabis at the moment. I just recently, as of April 14th, I just stopped. I just stopped 100%. And the reason, and I hate it when people tell me that, especially right before it was on blade. The reason is I view her as my auntie and the one that bought you beer or whatever when you're younger, and that was super cool, and it always break it down to you the way it really is. And I viewed it as, she's like, you can hang out as long as you want, but at some point you got to go home.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was just, I realized that smoke was just in the ceremony, but if we're always in smoke, and we're just up in the clouds, and we're not coming back down here either. And so it was time for me to come back home a little bit. Put my feet on the ground. I'm not done with it. I'm done with using it.
Yeah, no, that's a really important part of building a relationship with anything. I think that you do need to allow that space, whether it's people, plants, anything. You need to allow that space for the relationship to grow in the direction that it needs to grow in. And I think that's dope of you to just have that realization to say like, okay, let's make this a better relationship. Let's allow some space, and when you come back, that relationship is going to only be wizened by the experiences that you go through without it.
Yeah, and I've had a couple puffs here and there, and I'm good. I was smoking like 5 blunts a day. And I'm like, come on, like this is one. I couldn't produce it anymore, right? Like safely, and so I was purchasing it, and it was getting out of control.
And I mean, even like, of course, I love smoking a blunt here and there. It's awesome, but let's be honest, inhaling that much tobacco, like that's not good for you.
Yeah, but interesting enough about cannabis, it actually has no carcinogens in the smoke, and it can actually have a reverse effect.
Oh, okay.
But the actual oils that you smoke and inhale, that's why you notice the difference. You smoke a cigar and then you smoke a blunt. be way different. But yeah, I'm not a doctor. Just realize, yeah, it's just 30 months. I was ignoring that.
Yeah, I've mostly been trying to build a relationship with it where I'm only using it when I'm working on the channel or directly after a workout. Because directly after a workout, your blood's pumping, so you get super stoned off very little, anyways. So being economic about it, but also
Gratitude.
like using it as a reward like that. But I also, honestly, when I started smoking weed, I didn't start smoking weed until I was 19 years old. And I actually built a decent relationship with it when I first started it because I utilized it when I was exercising, and it became like it really became associated with health and wellness for me in a lot of ways. And of course, I've abused it as well. Like I ain't gonna lie, but
But that's like Nancy, man. You can't. You're not abusing. You're not in the wrong. You're like doing your aunt's house. It's cool.
yeah, that's right.
She, and she doesn't bite back.
Exactly.
And so I've been super grateful. And there's bomb weed that comes across my way. I love stuff from up north. Up
Oh
north.
yes, the Emerald Triangle is just a gift.
I like purple stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I like a good indica for bedtime and for pain relief. And I like sativa. I like a good sativa. A well balanced sativa too.
Yeah, I'm mostly a sativa guy. Um, I utilize weed as coffee in a lot of ways because I just mainly like to smoke a lot of sativas, and and yeah, it's definitely an awesome plant, but it is something that I recognize, as with everything, has its pros and cons, and I think it's awesome for the viewers on a weed channel to hear the story of somebody who is seeking a better relationship with that because I do think that oftentimes we can pretend that there's only positives to scenarios, and that's just not how most things go.
Yeah, man, we're in a world of duality, and I do believe you could smoke weed all day, every day, the rest of your life. And maybe look at Will and Snoop Dogg and stuff, but it also shrinks parts of the brain. It does create paranoia.
I mean, look at the world we live in, though. How do you not be paranoid?
Yeah, well, I know, man. And again, it's your relationship. Nobody gets to tell you how to have a relationship with the world around you. And I would say that Canada has been my best friend forever, man. And it's opened up my eyes, opened up doors. It's allowed me to create things that I didn't. I don't know if I would have, or given myself the permission to, or it was just the best. It was a good friend, and I'm grateful for that. I have nothing against it. I will smoke weed again. It's just kind of like alcohol too, Like we have to be in good relationship, and that's what I'm working on. I didn't drink for years, and it's but that fear is also a good relationship, and criminalizing yourself, that's not a good relationship. We're here to experience life. We and all these things in our life are here, and they're our greatest teachers. And I do believe that if you have an alcohol problem, if you have a drug problem, you should seek immediate attention so that you can have a clean break, and then you could reassess your relationship. But what tends to happen is we have a clean break, or we go to rehab or penitentiary or something, and then we live in a shame guilt cycle, and that doesn't help anybody. And it leads us right back to where we started. And under Western rehab, there's 90% relapse. And I think cannabis is the best cure for hard drug addiction. If you need to get off of opioids or heroin, like all this shit, like cannabis is your best friend, and they have enough versions and convenience to really walk people out of that shit. That stuff's heavy. Same with alcohol. I think she is like that friendly aunt that'll teach you home. And so I did that for years. That's how I stayed away from all the other shit. And so I finally like started addressing through therapy and through self realization that I was using it out of fear of returning or relapsing to a shame guilt cycle.
Oh.
And so now I'm confronting that. And I'm like, I'm good with everything, man. I'm all good. And I get to choose what kind of life I want. I get to choose what I want to put in my body. And nobody really gets to tell me how to do that. But now I can see that I wasn't deciding, I wasn't choosing at any point. I was trying, I was experimenting, I was listening to people, Geek TV. None of it was my choice. And so now I'm making those choices.
That's powerful, man. Those are some true actualized words, and I appreciate you sharing them with us. That's heavy.
Yes, it is heavy.
And I think that heaviness and seeking that heaviness is what we need to do collectively in a lot of ways, especially on our reservations. We have to address things, and we have to have open conversations with each other like this so that we can learn from each other and grow from each other's experiences. Because I do think that what you said right there, us criminalizing ourselves, that's something we do so much, and it keeps us locked in this cycle. And that's something that I'm like, okay, that's something that I can learn from as well. Like I need to really internalize that. That was powerful. I appreciate that.
You know, and that's not just us that was put on us, especially as indigenous or being younger people. Society is really good at letting us know that we're in the wrong and that you're in the right. But we also have that choice. We're not taught that we can choose. We can choose what's right or wrong for ourselves. And it's a long road, man. It's an intergenerational trauma of guilt and shame. And like you were saying earlier, with it was passed down, man. It was beaten out of us. It was beaten into us. And even though my mom's telling me I'm not native, like that's part of it too. Like where's the pride? Like why are you so shameful of who you are, where you come from? And it's deep. It goes deep.
Yeah, I think a lot of us we're so scarred, and it becomes a point where we either want to attach to the identity in the toxic ways that it expresses itself and just kind of muddle in it, or run away from it completely. And I think it's only been really recently where we've been able to reclaim our power in a lot of ways. And I think that the
Yes.
internet is something that is definitely a tool that can be misused, but I've seen the indigenous community really do a great job of using the internet. Like I'm proud of us in a lot of ways because I do think that I see more positive put out there. I see more honesty as well. I see a lot of people bearing their hearts in a way that's super important because that's what we need. We need that authenticity, and a lot of us don't have that around us. So the fact that we have methods of seeking that and being able to create a sense of self when having all this chaos around us, I think it's really important for the youth. It's been important for my development for sure, and that's why I figured a part of my mission would be to express what's gone on in my life, what I enjoy, all that, and put it out into the internet in some form, just to do that service because I know that there's a lot of a lot of kids who, they're on YouTube a whole lot, and this is a method of reaching out and hopefully connecting in a way and opening up some new ideas.
Yeah, well, bravo to you for taking that initial step and then having the courage. It's not always easy to be upfront and forward with the public and to share from the heart. It's like the hardest thing to do. And so, my hat's off to you, man. And I'm very honored to be here talking with you.
Yeah, heck yeah, and people need to make sure that they check out your music for darn sure, because that's what you do in your music, man. You share raw truths. Like, you're such a good storyteller, and that shit's catchy.
Well, it's all about, something you can listen to while you smoke, while you trip out. It is a trip. It is a trip. And, we have so many colors around us that we can incorporate at any time and put into our world. And that's what it's all about. Enjoying the ride.
Heck yeah, man. Well, this conversation has definitely been a dope ride. I'm sure we could talk forever, but we gotta go and integrate a lot of what we're talking about right now. So
That's right.
yeah, for sure. But we'll be able to reconvene again for sure, perhaps in some sort of ceremony, maybe a sweat, something dope.
That'd be dope.
Heck yeah, man. Well, I appreciate your time. We're gonna go off of live here now.
Well, I appreciate you, Brian. Thank you for doing this work. Keep doing